Hello, welcome to the Bahamas Then and Now. I'm your host, Rosemary Hannah, and we're very pleased to be bringing you this series of educational programs based on the history, heritage, and culture of the Bahamas, and to introduce to you those persons who have been involved in or are continuing to be involved in the development of art, history, and culture, and other aspects of the Bahamian life. Stay tuned, we'll be back shortly. We're here with Pam Burnside, the owner of Dungalik Studios. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you.
Pam is the widow, also the widow of Jackson L. Burnside III, a very famous Bahamian icon. And Pam, but we need to know a little bit more about you. Tell us where you grew up, the values that were instilled in you as a child, and how did you become so involved in the cultural life of the Bahamas?
Well, I enjoyed my childhood. I was born here in Nassau in Chippingham, in the home. I'm the last of 5 children. My mom is from Eleuthera. My dad was from Long Island. My father died when I was 6 years old, and so I had a very strong role model in my mother, who was able to bring up 5 children, and she was a very hard worker. She was also very involved in cultural activities. As one of the founders of the Carver Garden Club, I spent a lot of my childhood days preparing programs for her, doing flower arrangement, and I think that that's where my love for cultural things started. I was also a student of St. John's College, and we had a very thriving literature and art program there. I also danced with Shirley Hall Bass. I was one of the first people to dance with her troupe when she came here to Nassau from Chicago. And of course, my mother, being involved with the Carver Garden Club, was very friendly with people like Pearl Cox and Zoe Maynard, whose mother, of course, was Meta Cumberbatch. My eldest sister went to Meta Cumberbatch's piano lessons. And so we were always involved with the theater, with dance, with literature, with all things cultural. And of course, as I got older, I met Jackson. I was studying fashion design. My first degree was in English because I love literature. And then I went to London to study fashion design, and that's where I met with Jackson, and the rest is history. Because both of us had this burning passion for art and culture and Bahamian life.
What are some aspects of the Bahamian culture that we have lost?
Oh, we've lost so much, I think. Basically, I think we have lost our sense of independence. The Bahamas is a very naturally creative environment. The people are just, I think they are geniuses from the point of view of having to have lived in this environment that particularly on the Family Islands was very harsh. And so they had to make do with what they had. They had to be creative in using those resources in order to make a living. And I think that this is how we developed a very strong, I guess, attitude in making things work for us. We were very independent, we were hard workers, and I think we have lost that. We've also lost our sense of community, which is very important, I think, for who we are as Bahamians, because we worked together because nobody had much. And so by pooling our resources, just like you do in an ASU, we were able to help each other to survive. We have lost, I think, also a lot of our cultural background. Progress, I think, has had a negative effect as well as a positive effect on us, because we wanted to be like Mike. We wanted those things that our colonial masters had before us, and so we wanted to become like them. But in doing so, we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and we lost those very important values that made us special as Bahamians. When you think of things like our bush medicine, everybody knew what bush to pick if you had a certain ailment. We have lost things like our indigenous music. rake and scrape. And I must say that I give kudos to people like Nat Adams, who has formed the Rhythm and Youth Band and are teaching the young children those very important use of those instruments that made our own Bahamian music. When you think of things like storytelling that happened all throughout the Bahamas, because we did not have toys that we bought from the store. We had to entertain ourselves. And so the way to do that without electricity in the evening is you sat around the fire and you listened to stories. So our storytelling heritage is a very important part of who we are as Bahamians. And when you think of things like the motor car, when I was growing up, we played in the road because there were not many cars around. But now the Nassau in particular is just, chock-a-block full with cars. And the car really changed the dynamic of who we are as a community, because before we would walk wherever we wanted to go, and in that walking we met people along the way. And so we spoke to them, and that sense of community continued in this very basic activity that we did. But with the car, we then got into this metal vehicle, and we moved about those same communities, but we did not meet the people. We did not have that sort of communication with them. And it changed the dynamic of who we were as people. So we don't have that feeling of, I think, togetherness that we had before. So all of these little things have really made an impact if you stop to think about it. And independence, I think, unfortunately, took away our independence as people, because we did not need to do for ourselves as much. And so we bought things, we became bigger consumers rather than doing things for ourselves, making our clothes, making our own bread. I mean, who makes their own bread now? You buy it from the food store. And as a kindergarten teacher, I would ask my kindergarten students, where does chicken come from? And they say, Kentucky. Not from a farm, who actually does that work. So, it's all a different mindset of the present day Bahamas. And it's important to go back to who we were and remember those things, because it has a very deep effect on who we are and who we are going to be.
What you've said is so true, Pam. Let's talk a little bit about our culture. What's working now, and how do you think we can preserve it?
Boy, that's a difficult one. I think that we have certain people in the community who understand that we are losing this very valuable part of who we are as Bahamians. And those people need to get together in order to discuss this issue and find ways to remedy what we have lost. And Creative Nassau, which is a group that was formed by my late husband and I in 2008, has that as our mission statement. This is what we are trying to do, because we realize that we are losing a very, very important part of who we are as Bahamians, and we need to bring it back, to celebrate it, to promote it, and to educate the younger generation in particular about what a rich heritage we have, something that we can be proud of.
If we began teaching Bahamian culture in the schools, what would that look like?
If you look at the image of the Sankofa bird from Africa, it is a bird whose head is facing the back, but the body is moving forward. It's very important for us to go back to our heritage in order to make our way to the future. We have to understand where we have come from in order to be strong enough to go forward. And because a lot of the younger generation in particular do not understand all of the rich, I think, heritage that we have, we need to be able to tell those stories. That's very, very important. We need to be able to research those stories. We need to be able to promote those stories so that people know that they have a lot to be proud of. When you look at the mission statement of Creative Nassau, which is celebrating and promoting Bahamian art, culture, and heritage from the inside out, that means we are focusing on the people that we have here that have made us who we are as Bahamians. So we need to know the stories of those people. We need to talk to the grandmothers and the great-grandmothers that are dying out and taking their stories with them, for the craft and the folk art that they have left behind, the bush medicine, the cooking of the bread in the outside oven. I mean, how many young Bahamians even know how to cook in the outside oven? Being able to shuck the corn and make grits and take it to the place to make grits. Being able to take those peas and use the fanner to get all of the little pieces out of it. All of those things are very important to us as Bahamians, and we cannot lose that heritage, that traditional knowledge that we need to preserve and make sure that it is Bahamian and it is registered as such, it is copyrighted as such, so that people don't take it from us and we lose it for generations to come. And so, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of people don't want to work too hard these days, but somebody has to do it, otherwise we are going to lose these very important stories. So I think for teaching Bahamian culture, we need to start on the years gone by and bring it up to the future.
Well, Pam, this has been a very interesting conversation. We'll be right back.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now. This episode is brought to you by the Private Trust Corporation Limited, Dungalik Studios, United Sanitation Service, and Vodio.
This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, reefs, and keys, sporting a distinct history and heritage all its own. This is New Providence, most populated, industrialized island at the center of the archipelago. Home of Nassau, the capital city, seat of Parliament, location of political and social revolution, site from which our nation declared its independence. And this is Over the Hill, a community, a series of neighborhoods in what was then considered Southwest New Providence. Settled by slaves, having served as the midwife of national deliverance. Over the Hill, a breeding ground of nation builders, constructing trait by trait, precept upon precept, character-toting, culture-shaping leaders. Over the Hill, where independence was born, where the naval string of Bahamianization is buried, where Junkanoo got polished. Over the Hill, where sense and sensitivity were kneaded into the dough of children's souls, where people reverently genuflected to the image of God in every man. Over the Hill. East Street, Market Street, Blue Hill Road, Baintown, Grantstown, Anderson Street, Augusta Street, DeFort Hill, McPherson Street, Over the Hill, McCullough Corner, Hay Street, Glinton Square, where? Mason's Addition, Jail Alley, Lewis Street, Over the Hill. The Coakleys, the Smiths, the Johnsons, the Blydens, the DeStoops, the Grants and the Coopers, the McPhersons and the Pindlings, the Allens and the Winders. Over the Hill. The Hannahs, the Bostricks, the Burnsides, the Bethels, the Walkers, the Enuses, and the Thompsons, the McCartneys and the Gibsons. Over the Hill. What if we went back and dug into the soil of our glorious past? And what if we studied the roots and found the patterns of Bahamian unity and success and progress, and superimpose those on the social ills of Lil Nassau, the social ills of the Bahamas in general. What would happen? What would happen if we really understood where we came from? Our heritage is not ghetto. Our language is not profanity. Our resolution is not violence. We are Bahamians, kings and queens, gentlemen and ladies, athletes and warriors in every sphere, geniuses and priests, artists and leaders, and much of it started over the hill.
Welcome back. We're sitting here with Pam Burnside talking about Creative Nassau. Pam, tell us, how important is our national identity?
It's very, very important, and culture has a great role to play in it, because culture is really how we live in the community, you know. Everything that we do is culture, and culture is life. So if we ignore it, we are ignoring it at our peril, because everything we do is impacted by culture. So that's why Creative Nassau is so important to us, because we are focusing on what we as Bahamian people are doing with our life and how we should, I think, go forward with it, because we are seeing some trends that I think are not to our benefit. We have so much right here in our own heritage that is so important to us, that can really build us so much higher, but yet we tend to be going outside of our borders to look for other things to bring into us. Now, we cannot stop the influence of other cultures, but how much of that are you going to ingest that is going to change who you are as a Bahamian? And that is the very fine balance that we have to be looking at. And we cannot take those other cultures without sifting it through our Bahamian heritage, you know. And because we don't have that right up front and center in our lives, we are missing that very important part of this process. And for myself, growing up, my husband and I returned to an independent Bahamas. So we were all gung-ho in becoming Bahamian and showing what Bahamian meant in the visual arts, in everything that we did. And we have continued to do that 40 years later. And we are only now seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. But at least we had that very firm foundation to start off with. And so that has kept us very focused. And it has awakened in us a passion, knowing that we have this foundation and we need other people to recognize it so that they can also build on it. So I think that that's where the importance is. The educational component is very, very important. And knowing who we are as Bahamians and not letting other cultures influence that landscape.
So how do you see Creative Nassau impacting our culture, say in the next 5, 10, or 20 years?
Right. Well, talking about the light at the end of the tunnel, you know, I see Creative Nassau as the light, because it is the mirror into who we are now, and also the flashlight that we are taking to research who we were, where we have come from. We're looking in those dark places that we can't see anymore, and we want to bring them back into the light. And then we want to be the fireworks that celebrate who we are as Bahamians. You know, it's going to bring so much light into who we are as a people. I think that that is very important. And we have short-term and long-term goals, because we, using the analogy of the stick of fire from the Family Islands, the fire was the very important instrument of life in the family islands. There was no electricity, there were no gas stoves. The fire helped us to live, to boil our water, to help us to bathe, etc., etc. So when your fire at the end of the day was tapped down so that it would be there for you the next morning, if your fire went out for some reason, you had to take fire from your neighbor. So you would send someone over to your neighbor and say, ask Cousin Sue to send a stick of fire over so that we could then light our fire again. So we look at Creative Nassau as that same stick of fire that will ignite from person to person, from community to community, from island to island, and from the Bahamas to the world. You know, it is going to spread like a positive virus that will be caught one person to the other, but it will be doing good things, not bad things.
What you said is very interesting, especially the aspect of the fire and Creative Nassau being a fire to create change and to enlighten other people.
Yes.
And I'm sure that people, once they've seen the show and heard more about Creative Nassau, they will be anxious to become involved. And to really just to become involved with things Bahamian,
Right. And
our indigenous Bahamian culture. In your mind, who was a Bahamian in years gone by compared to who is a Bahamian today? Have we truly progressed?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think the Bahamian of yesteryear was self-sufficient, was proud, was a hard worker, was strong, was a community person, was a compassionate person, always working with other people. Nowadays we tend to be, and all of this is natural of course, we tend to be more closed. We're not as helpful to one another. We're very selfish. We are a consumer. We don't want to do things for ourselves. We are not independent. We are also looking for other people to do things for us or to solve the problems of our nation, when before we had to do them ourselves because we had no choice. We had nothing, but we had the strength of our character. And I think that that is what has changed. And it's not all lost because we can bring it back. It is still within us, but we need to be aware of it first in order to recapture it and go forward.
Yes, we really have to know where we're coming from in order to know where we're going. What is an authentically Bahamian product? And how do we ensure that we are producing what is indigenously Bahamian and not a misrepresentation?
Okay, well, that's easy for me to answer from the point of view of Creative Nassau, because Creative Nassau was formed in order for Nassau to be considered as a creative city of folk arts and crafts. And we are focusing on our two indigenous programs of the straw industry, the Bahamian straw industry, and our Junkanoo tradition. And if you look at where straw was and where it is now, we are in a very bad way. The straw market that I remember as a child was made up of artisans who were very proud to be able to produce a product from the very beginning from items that they found in their own surroundings, that they processed and made into a functional object at the end of the day, that they were able to sell in order to make a living, and to make a very handsome living, I'd like to put in. And we have also lost that tradition because in one hand, we're thinking that a straw vendor was probably a poorer person, but they were able to make enough money to send their children off to universities to become accountants, doctors, you know, you name it. So they were making a good living for themselves. But nowadays we are importing foreign goods and putting them in the straw market. And that is totally wrong when we have this tradition that we have developed from nothing. We're not using it. And the people who know how to do this plaiting and weaving and processing of the straw are dying out. We are not teaching it to our young children. And so this is something that needs to be brought back into the educational system. Everybody should know how to plait. Everybody should know which which plants are used to plant. And from the point of view of the straw industry being totally economically and environmentally friendly, it's a win-win situation for everybody, you know. And when you look at our Junkanoo tradition, Junkanoo is a very important part of who we are as Bahamians. And Junkanoo is something that here in the Bahamas has been developed to the nth level. We don't have that happening. We don't have that happening anymore. In the other islands where it was started many years ago, you don't see Junkanoo happening like that anywhere else but in the Bahamas. But again, we are not really focusing on developing Junkanoo as an economic engine. It is a very spiritual engine for our country. It is a way of celebration that is very, very important to the Bahamian psyche, but we are not looking at it as how can it make a living for that same Bahamian. And that also has to be examined, I think, in a much deeper level. So just for those two crafts and folk arts that we have that are indigenous to the Bahamas, we are able to see that it can really make a difference to the future of our country. It can be a third industry in the Bahamas. We talk about something called the orange economy now. All over the world, people are talking about how creativity can actually be an economic engine for a country. And here in the Bahamas, this is where we can make a third pillar of our economy that can help everybody. And it can actually be using things that we have right here in the country to make things that can be used here, bought here, and also exported to the world. We hope that this is going to be the way that we are going to let the whole world know about the rich Bahamian art, culture, and heritage we have right here in the Bahamas.
All very interesting, Pam. How do you see us going forward, though, with getting the younger people involved? Should this straw craft be introduced into the schools?
Definitely, definitely. And we are working on getting that done. You know, as I said, we are losing a lot of the people, the straw artisans who know this craft. And we cannot afford to do that. It is very important for us to take this traditional knowledge, to take this intellectual property, number one, and copyright it so that we know that it belongs to the Bahamas, and to show the children that they have a very rich heritage that they can draw on to make a living for themselves and generations to come, using products that are grown naturally right here in the country. There's no import that needs to be a part of it. Everything is right here in our hands. That's why the logo of Creative Nassau are these hands that are not only holding what is dear to us, but being able to offer it to other people and also using it to sustain ourselves.
Pam, this has been a very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
And we hope that the fire has been lit. Thank you for watching the Bahamas Then and Now. We encourage you to continue to watch the series. And thank you, Pam, for hosting us at Jungle Studios. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.